Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's program. My name is Brittany Veland, and I'm one of the Programs and Partnerships Librarians here with Arlington Public Library. Every year, Arlington Public Library hosts more than 3,500 programs, like the one you're at tonight. If this is the first one you've attended, welcome. And if you have attended previously, welcome back. I want to give a big thank you to the Friends of the Arlington Public Library for their continued support of all of our programs. All proceeds from their sales, from like their big book sale that they just had last weekend, support programs like this one. And I also want to thank One More Page for helping with tonight's book signing. And this is just a friendly reminder, please silence your devices. Every year, Arlington Public Library hosts a series of author talks called Arlington Reads. It's an author talk series that talks about the most pressing issues of our times: climate change, immigration, housing insecurity, democracy, tough topics examined and interpreted by some of the most accomplished and prescient writers of our times. Earlier this year, we celebrated the centenary of James Baldwin, who would have turned 100 years old in August. We welcomed authors like Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr., Anna Malika Tubbs, Jesmyn Ward, and George M. Johnson. Tonight, we begin a new series centered around Black futures, Afrofuturism, African futurism, and fantasy, and beyond. Graphic novelists Damian Duffy and John Jennings are joining us later this month on October 24th. They adapted Octavia Butler's works into graphic novels. And in November, we welcomed Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, the author of Chain Gang All-Stars. So a really exciting lineup, which I hope you will return for. But tonight, we start with Nnedi Okorafor and Roseanne A. Brown. Nnedi Okorafor has written a wide range of science fiction and fantasy novels for adults and younger readers, and has won pretty much all the awards you can think of for them. The Hugo, the Nebula, World Fantasy, Locus, Lodestar, you name it. Her debut novel, Zahra the Windseeker, won the prestigious Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature. You may know her for her series like Binti or Akata Witch, works like Who Fears Death, which is currently in development for a TV show at HBO, and Noor. She's also written comics, including an African futurist comic series, LaGuardia, which won the Hugo and Eisner Awards, along with comics for Marvel, including Black Panther, Long Live the King, Wakanda Forever, and the Shuri series. Her upcoming adult novel, which I'm very excited for, Death of the Author, comes out in January of next year. And here's what someone named George R.R. Martin has to say about it. It's her best work yet, about fame and family, culture and change, the power of story, the writer's life, and robots. This one has it all. Roseanne A. Brown is an immigrant from the West African nation of Ghana and is now local to the area. She's coming to us from Gaithersburg tonight. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland, where she completed the Jimenez-Porter Writers House program. Her debut novel, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, was an instant New York Times bestseller, an Indie Bestseller, and received 6-starred reviews. The novel was the first in a fantasy duology inspired by West African folklore, in which a grieving crown princess and a desperate refugee find themselves on a collision course to murder each other, despite their growing attraction. She has also worked with Marvel, Star Wars, and Disney, among other publishers. Moderating our conversation tonight is Julianne Waite, one of our youth services librarians from Courthouse Library. So please welcome Nnedi Okorafor and Roseanne Brown.
Thank you guys so much for being here tonight and part of our Arlington Reads. I also want to thank you guys for joining us and being a part of this segment. I'm so excited to sit down and talk to you guys, not only as a fan of your work, but also as someone who's very interested in where you guys got all of your inspiration and ideas. So before we dive in and to that, do you guys want to take a moment to talk about your latest book and series to give the audience some insight into what we'll be talking to tonight?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, hi everyone, and it is extra exciting for me to be back here because I actually used to live in Rosslyn for a little bit, and so getting here, seeing how much construction is still happening was definitely an experience. But I am Roseanne Brown, and I am currently, my most recent novel, I've been working on the Serwa Boating's Guide to Vampire Hunting series as part of the Rick Riordan Presents line. And that is focused on a creature from Ghanaian folklore, specifically Ewe folklore, called an Aje. And I just turned in the third book in that, so that book should be out sometime next spring. So that'll be the one to close out the trilogy. And so that should be perfect for any Percy Jackson fans out there, young or old.
Perfect. And what about you?
Yeah, ooh, that's loud. I like that. In terms of works that I have coming out, well, I have She Who Knows, which is, it's a novella, and it features Najiba, who is the mother of Onyesounwu from Who Fears Death. So it's her story, and it's a novella trilogy, and so it's going to be 3 books. I've already written the second, and I'm currently working on the third, so I know the whole story. And Najiba is a super powerful woman who is very much, in a lot of ways, she's more powerful than her daughter, which is a lot. So that's She Who Knows, and that came out in August 20th. And then in January, I have my novel, Death of the Author, coming out. I have too many things on my lap. Jeez. And so Death of the Author is a lot of things, and it is a Nigerian-American saga, family saga. So there's that. So it's very much about this, our main character, Zelu, who writes this amazing novel that goes on to do a lot of things. We'll just put it that way. It's a very meta, self-aware novel, because aside from being a Nigerian family saga, it's also it's about post-human robots in the future as well. And that's the only way I can put it, and that's why it's got 2 covers. So this is the front, and then that's also a cover. Yeah, and it has 2 covers for a reason. It's a braided narrative. You just got to read the thing. It's a lot. So and that one's coming out in January.
Can we just talk about this for the rest of the time? Because that is so cool. I'm just sitting here like, I just want to hear more about that, please.
And I was looking at the edges of it, so I wonder, is that a little rough draft?
It's a thing that I do,
Okay.
These edges. It's going to have the first editions of Death of the Author are going to have they're going to have sprayed blue edges, which are really cool. And they had that idea because they knew that I like to do this on the edges. So they're like, that would look really cool if it were in color. So yeah, I just do that. It's something that I do to books.
I'm definitely really excited about it. As a fan, I love your use of technology into your characters. When I was reading Noor, it was like my first book that I realized that included like a cyborg.
Yes.
And I was like, this is so cool. So I'm really excited about that. Before we dive deeper into your stories, I wanted to give you guys a chance to talk about what first inspired you to start writing, and where did your journey begin as a writer?
You can go ahead. 'Cause it's,
Okay, so where it began, so like you mentioned, I was born in Ghana, and we came here, my family immigrated, I was about 3 years old, and I don't know how well y'all know Central Maryland. Anyone here know Skaggsville? Yeah, oh, there we go, Skaggsville. So I grew up in Skaggsville, which is as exciting as it sounds, which is it wasn't. And so in Skaggsville, there was nothing to do unless you wanted to watch corn. It was read books. And I got sick of watching the corn, so I started reading books. And those was really like early on, especially being like being one of the few black kids in town, being an immigrant on top of that, so also having that sort of like layer of xenophobia going on. I felt very isolated, and books were one of the only places where I actually felt connection. Like I felt like I could connect with others. I couldn't like speak with them, but in the story I could read what was happening, and that was where that connection was happening. And so when I was a young kid and like just sitting there like alone reading book after book, I remember like distinctly thinking like, I want to write something that makes a person feel the way I'm feeling right now, like feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling understood. And so even as I was able to pick up the language and like pick up just English better and start to have a bigger life than that, that sort of love never stopped. like that desire to like sort of connect and use storytelling to be able to bridge cultures and bridge gaps. So I think that's where it really started for me.
No, I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's also crazy that you didn't speak the language at first, but automatically connected with books.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand what was happening, but like I did, but I felt it though. I felt it. I directly remember sitting there. I think it was like a series of fortune event. Like, wow, this is crazy. I don't know what's happening, but it's wild.
There's some pictures in there occasionally.
Exactly.
You're like, oh yeah, I've got it now.
I'm curious though, what made you jump from reading to writing them? Like, was that just a natural thing or?
I think so, because like,
Interesting.
just for me, it was just, I feel like I've always, when I'm looking at media, I was always more interested, not even so much in the media itself, but the people who made it. I have a distinct memory of my first musical my parents ever took me was Mamma Mia, back when I was 9, weird musical for a 9-year-old, but they took me to Mamma Mia, and I distinctly remember like everyone else is like singing about ABBA, watching the stage, but I'm like, who puts this together? Who looks at ABBA and is like, I'm gonna make a musical? And that was what fascinated me. There's just something about like, that was the thing that seemed larger than life. Like that, like, you know, the characters change, the actors change, but like those words don't change. And so the idea of that could be lasting, and that was where the connection was for me, that was what drew me. What about you?
Yeah, my journey to writing was different. That's why I'm like really interested in how you made that jump, because like I wasn't writing anything creatively growing up. I was very much I was an athlete, and I love bugs, you know, as in the bushes catching bugs and just obsessed with them and studying them and all of that. So that was me growing up. It's kind of a long story. It's how I started, because the way that I started writing wasn't normal. It took something happening specifically for me to turn to the idea of telling a story. It never crossed my mind to actually be the one to write the story when I was growing up. I loved reading. I read a lot. Reading was like candy to me. You know, I was the kid, I lived in the library. When I wasn't on the track or the tennis court, I was in the library just coming out with totally, like just stacks and stacks of books. Like I had treasure. It was just really important to me. So, but I never thought to be the one to tell the stories. It was when I was 19, because like, you know, I was an athlete and I played semi-pro tennis from the age of 9. And I was also a track star. So like, and I come from that. My family's very athletic. And when I was 13, I was diagnosed with scoliosis. And I've told this story many times. For those who have heard it, I gotta say it again. It's the only way to answer the question. So I was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was 13. Lots of people have scoliosis, but mine was very, very aggressive. And it got worse and worse, no matter what they did, no matter what exercises I did, and what I had a back brace, all of that got worse and worse, but it did not interfere with my athletics. I could run really fast, I could jump really high, I could walk on my hands, do flip-flops, all that stuff. And so, you know, I had my tennis career. That's how I saw the country, was through playing semi-pro tennis. And then when I was 19, it was when the doctors did an x-ray and they were like, your curvature is like an S. I mean, my spine was literally like this slowly compressing S. And at the time, I wasn't insecure about it, because, you know, I could do all these athletic things. You know, I was performing at this super high level. I was on the tennis team at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and after that first year, they did the x-ray and were like, if you don't have surgery on this, to straighten out this scoliosis, you're going to be crippled by the time you're 25, and you're going to have a significantly shortened life because all your organs are going to be compressed. Had no pain, no nothing, just looked weird. And so with that happening, I knew that I had to have the surgery. It's 100% chance. They said, we're working with the spine. There's a 1% chance of paralysis because you're working with the spine. That's what happens. And of course, I'm going to have the surgery. So had the surgery. Just to make a long story short, I'm like telling one of the most disturbing things that I've ever dealt with in my life really quickly. But to make a long story short, went in, had the surgery, woke up 9 hours later, paralyzed from the waist down. They did not know if I would ever walk again. They did not know why. I was in that 1% of people who react to that surgery with this mysterious paralysis. And that was the moment where that thing clicked in my head. It was in the hospital bed where like half of my body had disappeared. I was an athlete, so you do that to an athlete, it's extremely traumatic. And I had to do something. It was in the first few days. And what I did, I had a copy of iRobot, and I just started writing. Because I was in too much pain to read it. I just started writing this story to myself, which was about this, and I'd never written anything creatively. I just needed to do something, because I knew if I didn't, my mind would just go to a dark place and never return. And that first story that I wrote was about a woman who could fly. And when you can fly, you don't have to walk. So it was clear where my mind was just naturally doing. That was when I started writing. And it was in that moment, and I remember when I was writing that first story, it was a grand discovery. It was like I was the one writing the story. That was something I'd never, both of my parents are doctors. We don't do the arts in my family, so I'd never thought in that direction. And so that idea of being the one to write the story, and then there's something about putting the pen to paper and watching my hand create the words. So that kind of drew my mind and kind of took me out of the terrible place that I was. It was just all of those things all together. That was the grand discovery. And to make a long story short, I haven't stopped writing since. I had discovered this thing that I loved, and I knew I loved it in that moment. And that's kind of it's like discovering the thing, and that changed everything.
It's right, because when you're really in that flow, does it feel like a kind of almost an alchemy to you? Can I explain? People are how does it feel to write a scene? And it's 99% of the time it feels like the worst run of your life. It's just horrible, it's miserable, except there's that moment when it's clicking, when it's flowing, and it feels like it's almost coming from somewhere beyond you.
Yes.
And that feeling is I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah, it's what you're talking about there.
I would describe it as magical.
Mm-hmm.
It's magical. It's for one thing, it's for the first time I did it, it felt like walking on a tightrope with nothing to catch you. So it felt risky, it felt dangerous, but it also felt freeing and magical. And that moment of where you're creating something, it's hard to even put words to describe exactly what it is.
Exactly. I am not a runner. I do not come from an athlete family. We're all very squishy. But I feel the closest I ever understand the idea of a runner's high is that moment when you're in the scene.
And what I love about both of you guys' story, I think they're both healing. Writing was definitely healing for you guys in different ways, which I think both as a reader and a writer, that can be a very, very healing experience. I want to talk a little bit more about you guys' world building and the stories you create, because I think that is definitely the uniqueness that I see as a reader when I have read both of you guys' story. For one, I have always been a fan of fantasy and sci-fi and anything futuristic. And what I love about you guys' writing is also how you intertwine your own culture into it. And I literally was saying to some of my colleagues right outside, I think what I do love about this genre is sometimes when you read fantasy or anything futuristic, you can it kind of gets a little bit predictive, or I can see it, but I love how you guys take a unique approach, and I really it's new ideas, it's something fresh, and I really, really appreciate you guys' writing style. So to begin, because I always love knowing how your minds work, but how do you guys approach the world building process, and then where do you guys get your inspiration, either from current, how do you currently get your inspiration, or where have you gotten inspiration in the past?
You can go ahead. I just talked a lot.
So I guess for me, well, thank you for that. And it's always so interesting to me when, especially readers in America, Western readers, it feels so fresh and different to them, which I get, because for me, it always feels my first understanding of story it was through my mothers and my aunts, and they probably would not have told you that they were telling me a story if you asked them back. But everything, to give an example, when I was in 3rd grade and got bad grades, my mom told me that if I don't get better grades, cannibals from the bush would eat me.
Casual.
I know, right? And I want to be clear, I love my mother, she's a wonderful person. And that is one of those things that have stuck with me. And you'll actually, I've called them bushwalkers. They're a monster that recurs throughout my work, because that's just an example of, while I have some friends who talk, oh yeah, the folk tales were passed in a folk tale manner. They'd start this is a story. I'm telling you a Nazi in a story form. it felt like the way that the story was always passed was always just very interwoven. Like, there was the myth about you're not supposed to sweep after sunset because it'll invite spirits in. Or my family has a legend that my grandpa was once beaten up by spirits. Like, just all sorts of things like that. That would just be thrown in there. And there's a moment you're like, wait, what? Can we get back to grandpa here? Like, wait, what happened to him? But because just living in that environment, like this environment where like sort of myth and legend and folktale and belief, and then just everyday mundane, like this would be happening while we're on our way to Staples to buy poster board. Like that was just how I grew up, how I existed. It was always so intertwined. And so I knew when I wanted to write and when I wanted to start like officially writing for myself, I knew there was no way I could do it without bringing that into the work. And so with my first series, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, it was really important to write it in that sort of oral storytelling tradition. And so, like, the first line of the book, it starts, abra, come and gather, a story's about to begin, like, from the point of view of, like, a griot, a traditional storyteller, and really writing the book like a folktale being told to the reader. And so that would affect sort of the narrative choices I was making. So all that to say, the inspiration, it feels so ingrained almost. Not to say I don't do a research, because it takes a lot of research to write a book, y'all. But, like, that spark, it just felt like it was just always sort of there, and it was just sort of, it's less I was finding it and more it was waiting for me to like kind of stumble along and be like, I was already here, but now you're here.
Yeah, very similar. Like that idea of it being organic, you know, and the mystical being just part of the world. And like for me, it was from the very first story that I wrote, which was like the first official story that I wrote was in a creative writing class. And it was soon after. It was like when I returned to U of I, and it was memoir. So it was about an incident that happened with my sisters and I when we were all 1 year apart. So we were like 8, 9, and 10, and it was something that had happened in Nigeria. So my natural eye always, when I started telling stories, my eye just went to Nigeria. It just did, and that I think a lot of that had to do with those trips, because my parents I was born and raised in the United States, but my parents were taking my siblings and me back to Nigeria from a young age. And those trips were very foundational. They were always full of drama. It wasn't like you weren't going there for a vacation. You were going there to visit your relatives and just be. And so we would go there and like my sisters and I, we just kind of run wild with our cousins. Just run wild, doing all this, getting dirty and doing all this stuff and challenging people and getting yelled at and yelling back, all that stuff. And so those trips were really, really pivotal. And so when I started telling stories, that was the first place my mind went to. And it was like, so I wrote this story about my sisters and I in this crazy incident that happened on the way back to the airport in Nigeria. And when I workshopped it in my creative writing class, everyone just called it fantasy. And I was like, no, all of that happened. And mind you, this story included pink chickens. They were pink chickens, and I saw pink chickens. I did not make that up. They were pink chickens. I've seen blue ones since, too.
Sounds very normal.
Yeah, exactly. Normal,
Yeah,
you know?
just around.
Exactly, they were just around. And it turns out that some people color their chickens to show that those are theirs. But so this story had and there was something about the way that I wrote it that signaled fantasy to people, even though I was writing memoir, you know? And so that was already. So just the natural way that I viewed the world was already there. And then, yeah, all the folk tales and the just the mysticism that was in just naturally, organically in the culture was, so I'm writing memoir and I'm writing about my family and I'm writing about Nigeria, and those things would just naturally creep into what I was writing. And so yeah, a lot of it was just kind of interpreted as fantasy, and then after a while, I just went with it.
I was gonna say, did you just start embracing it?
Yeah,
you know what? I'm gonna get a little bit more dramatic now.
Exactly. Like I didn't have to, so it was a natural thing, and that's why sometimes I have, there's a push and pull with me when it comes to the label of fantasy, because I'm like, okay, the thing that you're saying is fantasy is not fantasy. That people actually believe that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's an interesting conversation.
No, I definitely agree with that. And oh my gosh, I totally forgot what I was going to say. But no, I was going to say, as someone, I grew up Mexican, and there's a lot of like little, like, you know, like you say, like I can't even say it, but like there's always like growing up in the household, there's like things that get said that feel so natural and normal. And I guess like when you talk to other people and they're like, what do you say in your house? And you're like, oh, just kidding, maybe not. But do you want to talk a little bit about you guys' characters that you guys have written? I know I teased them a little bit, but I really love the journeys that they go on, not only in these like big adventure senses, but also like the things that they experience internally as well. But I do feel like even though you are introducing them in these like fantasy futuristic worlds, there's still something that I think your readers can relate to them and see themselves into the characters. So my next question is, how do you keep your characters relatable to your audience? Is there something that you guys do in your planning process that you do that?
So I guess for me, and I'm going to focus in on one character because it's probably the one I've heard most about from readers. I have a character, Malik, the male main character in Song Wraiths Ruin. And two big things about Malik is that he can see spirits and he has an anxiety disorder. Like, and the thing is, it was very important to me when I was creating him, I wanted those two things to be separate. I didn't want one to be a metaphor for the other. The spirits are not a metaphor for his anxiety.
Right.
It's not like like they are very real spirits he's seeing. He's also very deeply anxious. And the reason it was important for me to write it like that is when I was writing it, I was dealing with my own sort of mental health issues at the time and also learning a lot more about my family and learning so much about in the community for like realizing like, oh, y'all have never had these conversations about mental health, have you? Like you guys have never, and then like really being able to see across the generations like these things, that patterns that kept propping up in ways like these mental health kept becoming like just this sort of elephant in the room that everyone knew about, but at the same time, it was never really like discussed, right? And so when I went in that character, I was really focusing from I want to write about a character, and it's not Africa, but a fantasy, one that like especially kids in the African diaspora will recognize as like this is an African kid who is dealing with like we were talking about, that very mundane, very understanding of the mysticism in a very literal way, and also dealing with mental health because I want to ground it in. I wanted to show, number one, this kind of kid could be a hero, and number two, the way that this all just exists, like, I wanted to fill the narrative like, okay, you guys know the narrative from this perspective, you know it from this point of view, but have you looked at it? How does having this kind of disorder change the way this character moves through the world? How does it change the way we look at his heroism and all of that? So I guess to answer the question there, for me, it's about sort of grounding. I'm always looking, when I'm looking at a character, I am always looking, first I'm asking myself what is the thing that like they would absolutely not do, and then number two is for what would make them do the thing they never do. And then number three is then, in what perspective then, why am I following this character? Like, why is this the only character that this story is going to make sense for? Like, why does this have to be this person, this perspective? Because if it can be somebody else, why is it not their story? And so crafting it from there, when I come from that sort of natural thing, and then all starts to kind of weave together in the magic Nnedi was talking about, like really bringing it all there. So I think for me, it comes in that grounding, knowing sort of who in my community, like if I was to pluck someone from my community and they were to be in this story, like where would this, like what is this perspective, what is happening here? But how does it work for you?
It's, so most of my stories start with the character. Mm-hmm. You know, it's I don't, well, we can talk about writing process. My writing process is crazy.
We'll just start crying.
Yeah.
Try and explain that.
Like I don't write linearly, I don't outline, I don't know what's gonna happen until I sit down and start, and then something starts happening. But usually I start with character. It's the character, my characters speak to me as well. Some of them they're all different. Binti was very nice. Only Sonwoo from Who Fears Death was mean and scary. Phoenix was really demanding. Like each of them have different, you know, they just have different ways of coming at me. And so I always start with character. And so I always know character, and when I'm writing, I feel that character is flowing through me. Like I will literally sit and have a writing session, and then finish, and then look at it, after a few hours and not recognize what I've written. It will be new, and I'll just be like, oh, that's really good, you know? That's really good. You know, it's like reading it for the first time. But each of my characters are different. Like I can't even, it's hard for me to even speak about their, like how they tick, because they are people to me. You know, and I could describe each of them, but I honestly, it's hard for me to even say how did I come up with them. I know with my novel Noor, Ao, she's part bionic. You know, she has a lot of robot parts, and I know that okay. So the story starts off with her. I mean, it's not really a spoiler. It's the beginning of the book. So I'm just going to say this, and the book's been out for a while. So the story really kicks off when she kills a bunch of men. Yeah. You know, and she's in the market, and she has this moment where she's basically accosted. She has all of these robot parts for various medical reasons. And she's one who faces her body. And she's not like, she doesn't shy away from things. She's not like, oh, well, I have this disability and I'm just gonna be in that. If there's a robot part that she could replace things with, she will do that. She has no problem with doing that. So she has all of these robot parts. And she's in a very conservative part of the country. She's in Abuja, and there are lots of certain religious beliefs that have kind of jumped the rails and are applied to people like her. And so there's a stigma, and she's been living there for a while, and she's not thinking about that. She's like, I live here, this is normal. And so one day she goes into the market and things are not normal. Mm-mm. Things are not normal, and she ends up reacting, and her body reacts in a way that's kind of unexpected. So she ends up killing a bunch of men. Now the way that scene, so when I was writing it, the way that scene initially kind of materialized in my mind was there was something that happened to me when I was in Abuja, you know? It was like, I must have been like 20 or something. And like, it was the first time, Abuja is it's sort of north. It's the capital of Nigeria. It's sort of north. It's very Islamic. And it was my first time being there, and I didn't realize, I don't know, I just was stupid. I mean, the internet wasn't as much a thing back then, or whatever. And so I was wearing these shorts. But I remember they were very ugly shorts. They were ugly shorts, but they were shorts, fine. You're not supposed to wear those. And so, we arrived at the market, and I get out of the car with everyone, and walked into the market. And I remember the vibe just shifting. It was like a record scratch moment where all attention turned to me. And I remember in particular, there was one man, there were a bunch of men that were sitting on stools watching. And I don't know, maybe they were talking or whatever, and they looked very wealthy and traditional. And they saw me, and one of them actually fell out of his seat. It was like comical. It was ridiculous. He fell out of his seat because I was so shocking in my ugly shorts. But in that moment, though, I felt the way that all of the attention turned to me, I felt danger. I felt strong danger. And I remember I just stopped, looked around, turned around, went back to the car and refused to get out of the car. And so that, when I was writing AO in that moment, that's where that came from. So it's like when I sit down to write and start telling these stories, I have the character in my head, and then I sit down and whatever comes, and then I take it from there. And that's how that opening scene came, and that opening scene propels the whole story from that point on. And so that's really how my characters as a whole kind of come to me. It's just a lot of stuff, and then they're talking to me, and then I take it from there.
Yeah. You mentioned that the characters speak too, but this might be a weird question. Do your books feel different in your head or your body? Like, does each book, like, because I've known, now that I have a couple books, I feel like each one feels different. Like, the part of my brain that holds, like, the Wraiths series feels different than the part that holds the Wall. Like, how do those different series feel in your body?
Yeah, they're separate worlds. I mean, a lot of them are connected, And it's like, just feels like this world that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more complex. But yeah, they're all very different. And you'll find that when you have a lot more books and then you have to speak about them, you're gonna feel like you're going a little bit crazy.
You're just like, oh, snap.
Like now.
Better hope no one read this so I'm not lying right now. Oh no. Yeah, I can imagine.
No, I love that. And actually, you guys talked about two characters that I did want to talk a little bit more about. And what I loved when I was reading about AO is, even from the very beginning, they're unapologetic about like being like having like robotic parts, and just owns it. And she's ready to be like, oh, if this goes out, just give me the next thing. But it felt really, really cool to read about, and I loved seeing that. And also with Malik, without giving spoilers away for your series, I love that he ends up like halfway through the book he finds himself in a situation where he uses his strengths in storytelling, even though he was super scared. So I love that even though they have these disabilities or disorders, they own it and end up strong throughout the story, which I really love to see. And with that, is there anything you hope readers take away from your characters, especially specifically the ones with disorders or disabilities?
I mean, I guess if we're talking about disability, it's that confidence that you're talking about, like embracing it, embracing whatever it is, it's your specific situation, and having in kind of navigating your world through all of that. I think about the way that I've had to deal with my own disability, because for me, when I went through what I went through, and I learned it took me a whole summer to learn how to walk again. But the thing is, my proprioception, which is that ability to know where your legs are in space, or where whatever part of your body is in space, is gone, and so for me, when I walk, and this is where it has definitely kind of morphed into so much of my work, because when you see like rusted robots, there's so much, it's so meta, I can't even so I had written, I'd written a brief memoir called Broken Places in Outer Spaces, and in that one, there's a chapter called Rusting Robots in it. And in that chapter, I talk about when I learned how to walk, it was like, that ability that you have, when most people walk, it's like intuitive, they're not thinking about it. And for me, because of what happened to me, I have to think about every single step I take. Raise leg, move forward, put leg down. I have to think about, it's very robotic, So this idea of seeing, and that's why I call myself a rudimentary, cyborg, and embracing this idea of the robot. That's where that comes from. And then I found that I started relating a lot more to robots and replacing parts and having parts break down and rusting and all of that. I love Transformers as well, so there's that. So all of this comes from this idea of, okay, this is my whatever. I mean, you can call it a disability. Calling it a disability is fine. It doesn't give me any insecurity, but that's what I want people to come away with. Whatever it is that that is theirs. It's not even that they're dealing with it. Whatever it is that is theirs, embrace that, and then act accordingly, and don't let it, pull you down. Find a way to move through the world and be proud of that and be confident in that. I think that's what I want people to take away from it.
No, I love that. And also I think it's very, I don't know, call it fate or something, that you had iRobot there in the hospital with you. And then, that's so crazy. What about you?
I mean, can I just be ditto? But I guess the only thing to add to that, since mine focuses less on sort of physical disabilities and more mental disorders, neurodivergent, coming from it from that point of view, always trying to center neurodivergent and characters who think and experience the world in other ways. I want readers who have that experience to really sort of not be afraid, and I forget the author who said this, so this is going to be real embarrassing. It was someone very famous, but the author who speaks about letting the center come to you. Was that Toni Morrison? I always want to be Toni Morrison, but
We'll go with that.
or maybe it was Octavia, but a black woman author who spoke about how she's people are like, oh, you're writing from the fringe, but she's like, why am I the fringe? Why can't the center come to me? Why am I not the center, right? And so, that was who? Butler. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, Toni. I'm sorry.
I know.
If I get smited right now, you know why. But that quote, I think the first time I heard that, it really stuck with me, just because that idea of like, especially, I'd always see myself at the fringes, and like, it felt like my experience was like, it was reinforcing that, like knowing I was in the minority, being even within the minority of where I was growing up, the minority of the minority, and all that, and then having that permission and feeling like another author giving that permission that like, you are not at the fringe, you can be the center can move to where you are. So I think with the work, like, by centering these characters who have these neurodivergencies, these traumas, these like different ways of like thinking, like allowing yourself, like what happens if you put yourself at the center, and also who doesn't want you at the center and why don't they want you there? Because that's the flip side, because like it would be a lie to sit here and be like, oh, we all just feel this way because we just feel bad about ourselves. Like, no, they're all very insidious, very real institutions that have wants people of color, queer people, so many different marginalized peoples to never feel they're at the center, to never allow themselves to be at the center. And so there's a flip side of that, like bring the center to you and also question, why is the center not big enough for all these people? Who is being kept from the center and why? So that's what I think I would want readers to get.
No, I love that. And you talked about a little bit earlier in our conversation about mental health not being a conversation that a lot of cultures have. I know, like growing Mexican, you don't talk about that. You don't talk about your sadness. You don't talk about anxiety. You just nose to the ground, keep it going. So I think even with that representation, allows people to be seen and see that there's other characters like them as well. Which kind of takes me to my last question before I turn it over to the audience. I just want to thank both of you guys for sharing your stories, because I know as someone who grew up and loved reading and loved books, didn't often see myself represented in those stories. So I can't tell you enough, I'm sure you guys know as well, like how validating it is to see a character, see yourself in the character. So thank you guys for sharing your stories. And my last question is, what positives have you seen from sharing your stories, whether for yourself or even like feedback that you've gotten from your community as well?
I guess my favorite reader letter I've ever gotten was from a teenager who she was actually writing, she was on psychiatric hold, right? And she's like, your book is the only thing I've read like while I've been here in the hospital. And like the line she said that still gets me every time, she's like, your book makes me feel like I'm not crazy. And so I think like sometimes I think about that and I just start tearing up, but I think that just sort of everything I was just saying, that like that's giving space for like what we would consider crazy, and all the things that we would have just labeled like, oh, those are the insane people, draw them over there. And just knowing that like as hard it can be, as sometimes it's very uncomfortable, it's not always super fun getting that raw on the page, but like knowing someone else saw that and they're like, yes, like this is the space, this book, I think that's what, like that's probably one of the biggest positives I've gotten, right?
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar. I mean, I just want to say though, like, as a kid, I didn't have any of this. Like, I mean, I loved stories, I loved books, all of that. And like, my library did not have anything. I mean, when we're talking about, I discovered Octavia Butler late. You know, I discovered Ursula Le Guin late. Really late, and so I didn't have any of that growing up. And there are times where I look at young people now and feel envy. Oh, because I'm just like, that. You know, it's like there's so much more. I mean, of course there can always be more, but man, I'm coming from a time where I had nothing. Yeah. I had nothing, and so like when I have people who come up to me and they're like, wow, I get to see myself in a story. Like, I didn't experience that at all. I don't even know so it's like a lot of the things that I was writing were because I'd never seen that. And I was writing it like, it wasn't because I saw someone else do it and then I felt like I could do it. I didn't have that. It was just, I was doing these things out of a need to see those things, and like from the inner child in me, a need for the inner child in me to see those things. And so like the fact that I was able to manifest a lot of it is a really, really great feeling. And when I do, I mean, yes, I feel a little bit of envy, but it's a good envy, it's a healthy envy. It's very healthy. So like when I see what they get to read now and get to see, and even on the covers, you know, you get to see these beautiful covers with different people on them, and I think it's great for not just those on the fringes, but those who are in that imagined center as well, and what it's doing for them. Yeah. You know, it's just it makes me happy. I mean, there's so many things to complain about right now, so many. but but let's hold on to the good things too, and I think that's definitely a large part of the good things.
Even when I think about how many just African characters, African
Yeah.
writers are writing, because the only
Yeah.
African character when I was a kid, y'all remember Kwame from Captain Planet? He was holding it down for everybody in the entire continent for like 2 decades. No, I'm just like, they don't know how good they have it.
Like, that's my hero.
Kwame. He was doing a lot.
No, and I love what you were saying, that we talked at the beginning when we sat down with this conversation that writing was healing for you, but definitely since you guys are sharing your story, you're also healing like future generations as well. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right, now, thank you guys so much for joining us again. If you guys want to form a line at the mic, and we'll answer some questions.
I want to say that my first Octavia Butler book had Lilith as white on the cover,
Yes, yes.
and I
got a
didn't know
copy
she
of
was
that.
black because I didn't know who she was.
Wow.
Initially, I got to meet her a couple
Gorgeous.
times, so I feel very blessed. But my question is about your series, Akata Witch Warrior. You talk about in that book that that's a slur. And I never know what level of slur it is. Like, I don't know whether I can say the title.
You can
Right?
say the title,
I can say the title.
but someone might come out. It's a
I'm like-
conversation. It's a conversation.
I'm always like, oh, it's the one that's a slur, and you're not supposed to say it. It starts with an A, so we're just going to call it warrior, witch, woman. You know, like,
It's cool too. But I mean, it's fine to say, but like, I'll tell you, the reason why I named it that was in a moment of rage.
Fair.
It was literally, I had finished, and I can't remember what the original title was. All I know is I did not like it, and I knew it needed to change. So it was on my mind. And that evening, a Nigerian man had called me an Akata. You know, he said, you Akata. Because to him, I was mouthy, mouthy American. You have no respect. You're Akata. And I was mad, and I was like, I'm going to put this word right in the title. I'm going to put this right in the title and make people talk about it. And I'm like, and I remember looking around, I'm like, are there any novels with this in the title? Nope. So I'm going to do that. So that's how I got Akata Witch. And I knew that by naming it that, it was going to start conversations and arguments because I knew how fraught the term was. And I wanted that. So it's perfectly fine to say, but be ready to have the conversation. Be open to having the conversation. That's really all I ask.
okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Hello. Thank you so much, first of all, for this conversation. It's really wonderful and inspiring. I am also a son of immigrants and a science fiction fantasy writer. Wasn't always one. So my question to you is, as children of immigrants and writers of science fiction fantasy, I think we have to deal with the world on two fronts. The first one is our families, who don't necessarily understand what we do, don't really understand what science fiction fantasy is either. And then the other front is the rest of the world, who looks down at science fiction fantasy as it's not a real literary form. So how do you deal with that, and what weapons do you use?
Weapons. Oh gosh. Well, on both fronts, I will say I was very lucky in my immediate family that all my family are very big nerds. They weren't nerds in the way I was, but like my dad was also a doctor, and so they were very much book people. And so they're like they weren't genre book people, so they weren't fine to fantasy, but they're like, we get books. You want books?
Yeah.
Okay, you can have books. One of the when I was in second grade, my dad gave me a copy of Jane Eyre. It's like just like they're like, if you want to read a book, you can read a book. Here, let's go. And so, but I guess with that, like there were family members who were a little less understanding about it, and so whenever I think what helped most was the word here, couching it in the context that they understood. And once I was really couching in the context of, I am trying to bring the storytelling and like really harking back to like, because every culture has their storytelling like culture and their storytelling thread. And so when I was harking it back to like, Anansi lives because you've told this, because your grandma lived, like Nyame and all these other figures live because they've been passed on here. So when I was putting it in this context, and like, I know like putting it in this science fiction fantasy might not be the way you've seen it before, but I am still working in this tradition because like my family, they really understand tradition. So putting it in the context of the tradition helped a lot. So on that front, that's sort of how I did it. On the rest of the world front, I run on spite. I'll be honest with you. I run on deep spite. And in college, I was in the Writers House program at UMD, which puts a whole bunch of writers. We all lived in a dorm together, and every week we had a workshop together. And one day, when I've gone through a lot more therapy to unpack that experience, I'm going to write about it because it was as crazy as you think it would be. Because putting all those like early adult kids together, because we're basically kids, and then giving us free reign to use our egos, was bad. But I was the only black kid in the workshop, and I was one of maybe 2 or 3 people who wanted to do genre. And so I am going up against other writers who, for them, like, literature stops at Jack Kerouac.
Right.
That is for them. And so I distinctly remember turning my first story in, which it was about, I remember this, it was about a Ghanaian American family on a road trip, and they stopped by a fruit stand in the middle of nowhere, and they start eating the fruits, and each one of the fruits, the father and the family's eating it, and it gave him a vision of the ways a different conversation could have gone. It was a conversation when his eldest daughter came out. And so each fruit was a different version of that conversation. And of course, what happened was that she ended up being disowned. So the fruits were like, what if that did not happen? So it was a way to like kind of doing a whole lot of layers there through that science fiction like thing. And everyone just being like, so the fruit is magic? And I'm like, oh God. I just like remember sitting there and like, if anyone has been workshop, you guys know how these workshops are like, you're not allowed to say anything, even if people are just so culturally just off base that like, you just gotta try and like bring them back in. You're not allowed to do that. But just like knowing I was being misunderstood on such a visceral level, it burned. Like I distinctly have a member sitting there like listening to him being like, I don't get why you're writing about magic fruit. Like what? And like, but just that burning and like, and that understanding, because something dawned on me like, oh, this is just a taste. Like if I want to do this, because I could have come back the next week with my story and written a Jack Kerouac story. I don't know what he writes about, but I could have figured it out. I've never read him, to be fair. But I was just like, you know what? No, because I do not want these guys to, I don't want them to win. And number 2, I'm like, I know that like, the story's not perfect, obviously. I was a freshman kid in college. Of course it wasn't perfect, but I'm like, I know why and what the story needed to be and why I need to be there. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if they don't understand it. I understand that part of it. And so refusing to budge from that part of it. And of course, being flexible in terms of like craft and like learning to better yourself in other ways. Because you will meet people who are willing to, number 1, respect the cultural interiority and like positioning of your story, and then can also help you better it as like on the craft level. But like refusing to budge, because I have friends who have spoken about like, yeah, like when they had that similar experience, like they budged and they were like, I wish I hadn't spent so much time trying to write what I thought was wanted from me and not what I knew I was meant to be writing. Yeah. Sorry, that was a long answer, but
Thank you.
Yeah, all that is so familiar, all that. Actually, yeah, my dad gave me, when I was in 4th grade, a copy of Moby Dick, so I understand. And I read it and loved it. But yeah, I both of my parents were doctors, you know, and then also immigrants. So they had the immigrant mentality, which is, you know, that there are 4 careers.
Doctor, lawyer.
Doctor, engineer, lawyer, and failure. Oh, the 4th one is failure. Yeah. Okay? You know, so like when I wanted to go into writing, it was just a fight. It was not pretty. They were just like, no, that's not a real career. Writers don't make money. Like that's my dad is all about, does it make money? Yep. Writers don't make money, so therefore it is not legitimate, no. It took many years. So you heard the way that I started writing. So there was that. So when someone starts writing in that way, nothing's gonna stop them. So nothing was going, once I discovered writing, I was obsessed with it. I loved doing it. I did not care about money. You know, I was, whatever. But I was just always doing it. No matter what my parents said, I was just barreling forth. I basically didn't listen to them. I'll just say that. I didn't listen. What I did listen to, though, was my dad saying, you need to make money. So that part of it, like, I grew up with affluent parents, and there was no way I was going to do the starving artist thing. So that was always in my mind. So I just, I kind of navigated that. And so, and that's why I have a PhD. You know, I actually have two masters. I have a master's in journalism, a master's in literature, and then a PhD in literature with an emphasis in creative writing. Now, I did not want to do the PhD. I did not, but in my family, you are nothing unless you get a PhD. So they're like, oh, you want to do this writing thing? Fine. So that's where the journalism part came in. So as a reporter, you make money as a writer doing journalism. That's why I did journalism. But the PhD, I did not want to do, but you know, in my family, you get a PhD. So they were like, okay, if you want to do the writing thing, find a PhD in creative writing. And I did. I found the University of Illinois in Chicago had a PhD in literature with an emphasis in creative writing, which meant that your dissertation is a novel. Wow. And that's why I went there. So yeah, I have all of that. And so in the process, I had to prove to them, you know, before I got any respect. And what really gained the respect, it wasn't publishing my first novel, it was winning the Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature, which came with the prize of $20,000.
I know that's right.
That's what convinced my family from that point on. So I had to do a lot. But that was, you know, the immigrant mentality really, I think it really helped me in terms of my drive and my discipline and my focus as a writer. Now, on in the academic side of it, yeah, I've dealt with all of that. And I you know, like I said, I have 2 masters and a PhD. Throughout all of that, I was taking creative writing classes, starting with my BA. That's where I started really writing, was in my second year of my of undergrad. And from there to the end of my PhD, I had professors who I loved and who I learned a lot from, who told me that science fiction and fantasy were not real literature. I shouldn't be writing it. They were trying to convince me all through. And of course, me being bullheaded, I was just like, anyway, keep writing the magical thing. I had a professor who, she put it on the syllabus at no science fiction or fantasy in this class. I was working on The Shadow Speaker, which is a post-apocalyptic narrative where mysticism comes back to the world. I was working on that novel in a future Niger. That was a novel I wanted to workshop in that class. You know what I did? I kept writing that, and I submitted that, but I just called it, this is where the labels things come in. I just called it magical realism. And it worked. It worked. Yep. The way that you get through in academia, I will just say, it's very similar to with my parents. You have to be the best. You just have to be stellar, because I knew that what I was writing was good. I knew it was good, and I knew it was strong, and I knew that therefore my professor would still like it, because her snobbery with science fiction and fantasy comes from an ignorance of the genre. They haven't read the good stuff. They've only read the bad stuff, or they've only read a little bit, or they're poorly read in it, and they just want to make it bad because they specialized in the Canterbury Tales or something, So I understand that, but that's how I came at it, and that professor ended up being my advisor for my PhD. So these things can be shifted, but you just do your best. You do your best and barrel forth, and always write what you want to write. Always. Don't let anyone tell you to write something else, because it will not be satisfying.
That's true. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hi, so I just have a fun question, but if you could adapt your books into any format, whether it's a fashion show, a board game, video game, musical play, which book would you like to adapt and in what format?
Can I give 2?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I want the Sarah Wall series. I want an anime. I think that series
that's cool.
So fun and just very lively, lots of action, lots of pew-pew going on, great stuff. And then with the Wraiths series, mostly because I think I just get a kick out of it if nobody else does. I want a Broadway play because I like musicals, and I think that'd be hilarious, and it would probably be the worst selling musical of all time, but I would enjoy it.
I mean, it's assumed that we both want our stuff to be adapted for TV and film, so whatever. So that's a given. I'm trying to think of other. I think that I would want. I'm trying to go through my books. Either the Insibidi Scripts series or Zara the Windseeker to be adapted into a VR world. Ooh. I love VR. I just love it. Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah.
Just my 2 cents. I think it would be really cool to make a makeup line off of the books. So,
that's
I mean,
so
that
cool.
eyeshadow
Yeah.
palette would go hard. But I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you so much for showing up. This has been so amazing to hear all of your stories and just experiencing these worlds. I love the exploration of Nigeria and the characters, that is not just a monolithic thing, but you get to see the richness of those worlds and the different peoples there. I guess, even though I was coming, I wanted my book signing from you. I have a question for you too. I also write, but I've also been struggling with anxiety, depression, all sorts of different things. And I want to know if you have any other kind of like advice or encouragement to like write even when you don't want to write.
When you don't want to write, oof.
Or that you find it hard, like you are cycling back and you're just like going through your work and you're like, I know what I want to write, but it's not there yet. And not getting discouraged and going into an editing loop.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the editing loop's actually the easiest question for me to answer, because
Yeah.
the way I do that is I am no longer allowed to edit as I write. So essentially, like, if I'm writing a draft and I realize, like, oh, snap, I should have, like, killed that character back in chapter 4, I just, oh no, I just write a note where I am, and I keep going as if I'd made that choice. Yeah, because it's like at that point. So that's actually pretty self-editing. It's hard to get used to it, but if you refuse to give yourself permission to edit and like you just draft, and also when I edit, it helps that like when I have the time, sometimes deadlines don't allow this, but when I have as much time as I want, sometimes I'll do a pass that's just a character pass. So like I'm going through, there might be issues with the world, but I'm not worried about that. I'm just going, is the character arcs flowing? Are characters feeling real? Are they popping? And then the next pass will be like a world pass. So I'm ignoring characters and dialogue, but I'm like, is the world here? Are we moving? Is the scene doing that? So that can help sometimes with breaking it down. That's how my brain likes things kind of broken down like that, and it makes it feel less overwhelming, especially knowing like, okay, if I'm focusing character here, I can ignore these other mistakes for now, and then eventually it all gets done. And the other question you asked though, I think one of the biggest things that helped me as with coming to a better understanding of my own anxiety, and I was later diagnosed ADHD, so bringing the ADHD into that.
Same bestie.
Exactly. It was knowing what kind of, I feel like the solution is different based on what kind of resistance you're coming to, because when it was the resistance of just like, spiraling like, oh gosh, it's not good enough, like because that was an emotional problem, there was nothing on the page that was gonna fix that for me. And so that was a sign that, okay, the issue's coming in here, so I need to be dealing with this right now. So that would mean stepping away, and that would mean taking care of my mind, taking care of my body in the ways I needed to, so I could come back to the page. Because like if the issue's happening here, there was nothing on the page that was gonna fix that. But when I was having an issue, I was finding an issue inside the story, and it wasn't just happening in my head, but it was in the story that was then coming to my head. That was then, okay, it's one thing if it's happening here, that's separate, but if this is happening on the page and it's coming here, then it was about knowing that, okay, here, where is this coming from? And figuring out, I usually try and go back to the last thing that truly, it goes back again, how a book feels. Like this sounds so very like, woo, but like what felt like it was in the correct spot. And then the moment it felt like I've moved from the correct spot, I'm like, that means something happened right there. Even if it's a single line, that something happened in that spot that moved the story off the path. And then figuring out what happened here. Because sometimes I find like I'm having an issue back in chapter 68 or, and then I'm like, where am I off the path? Where am I off the path? I was off the path in chapter 20. And so sometimes it can really mean going back, but really knowing like, where did I truly veer off the path? Because the number of times it feels like the actual problem where I'm feeling the problem versus where it's happening aren't always the same spot. So in that scenarios, it's really figuring out like, have I truly diagnosed where the problem is actually happening here? I hope that helps.
It did. Thank you so much.
Hello, yeah. You both talk about adapting personal experience into your stories. So I'm curious how conscious that is during your writing process, if that's a conscious use of that experience into your writing, and how that marries with the ideas you may have where you may be drawn to something in fantasy and sci-fi for other personal reasons. So how does that experience really, how do you blend that into like your more genre aspirations, and how does that actually pop into your brain when you're writing those stories about those experiences?
I don't know. It's like it's all connected, I guess you could say. It's like sometimes it's conscious, and then sometimes it's not. You know, like with Death of the Author, this thing is all about my family, like consciously about my family, and I started writing it for that reason. You know, I started writing this when I was like in a very painful place. Who Fears Death started with the passing of my father, like the first chapter. That opening scene where she's at her father's funeral and she's looking at his face and thinking that he looks different, that he doesn't look like himself anymore. And then she puts her hand on him and his body starts breathing. And all this very mystical stuff happens. I mean, that literally was me at my father's wakekeeping when I found myself alone in the room with him and looking down at him. And then I remember just feeling like something terrible was moving through me and it was coming from the ground, something terrible that was going to destroy everything in this room. And I remember my mom and my sister came in and took me out of there. That night was when I wrote that opening scene. You know, it was literally that night. And Who Fears Death took me 6 years to write. And in those 6 years, that beginning moved all over the place. It was in the middle, it was at the end, it just moved all over. And then by the time I was done, it was right back at that beginning. So it's like, that's a very personal, specific moment. And when I wrote that scene, I did not know what the story was at all. I just sat down and just started writing this thing, and I did not know that when I was writing it, she's there looking at her father, and then there are people at the wakekeeping who are looking at her, and everybody hates her, and everybody's afraid of her. I didn't know why they were afraid. So it's like a blending of this thing that happened to me, like in the emotion of it, the pain of it, and then that blends with the character. And then that became the story. And then the story moved on from there. So it was almost like a runway to her story. So like I couldn't tell you what part was conscious and like I don't know why I did that, but I just did that. So I think that's how it usually happens for me. And like there's an openness that I have when I'm writing to my personal experiences and like what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. Like I'm open to letting that bleed into the story, and I'm not bothered if I alter it, and if I add to it, or if something's affected by it, or if it happens in a different place. I'm not bothered by that. I'm just very open to all of it, just kind of organically becoming whatever it's going to become.
Yeah, and I guess my one thing to add to that is one piece of advice I got that really resonated with me was the idea of writing about scars versus writing about wounds. With the idea like, a wound is something, especially emotionally here, something you're still going through, you're still working through, you're still actively bleeding it out, versus a scar that's something that has healed, it's still there, it's not going away, but like you're on the other side of it. And not saying writing one is better or worse than the other, but the way you approach it is different. Because like with Wraiths, I can definitely tell I was writing wounds. I was still working on stuff I myself was still working out. And so that not only did that like affect the writing itself, it was affecting my process of doing it, because it's like you're processing as you're writing. Versus like the Serwat series, where because I was drawing so much from my childhood, I was writing about scars. It was very much like experiences with racist teachers I had in elementary school and stuff that I'm like, I am now like over it, but at the same time, it's like that scar of experience that's always there. And so knowing going in, it can be difficult when you think you're writing about a scar, but you're still actually writing about a wound. And you're still actively processing through it. And that's when sometimes like the story's gonna take you places that it's not that you want your story to take you places like you didn't think you were going to go, but like it can be more intense, I want to say more traumatizing than you might be ready for. And so it's really acting yourself like, and if that's where you need to be, that's where you need to be. But it's just knowing that if this process is going to take me to that place that I might not be ready for yet, or I don't have the tools for yet, there might be different repercussions than if I was writing about this when it was actually a scar. And there's some things that's just like, you know what? This would be a really great experience. Well, this would make a really great story, but this needs to be a scar before I'm ready to write about it.
Thank you both.
Hello, I don't know how to follow that. I first of all just want to say I discovered you and your writings. I am in an online book discussion group, and we talk about speculative fiction. That's the phrase, you know. And we have read 2 collections of short stories written by writers of the African diaspora, island, continent, everywhere. And in one of our first meetings, something came up in discussion, and someone said, "Oh yeah, that's like Akata Witch," and she just yelled, "Juju, it's real!" And I went, okay, I gotta go read that.
Right. She's so right about that.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say, first of all, I wanted to thank both of you for bringing that whole category, this is a bad word, category into my reading and other readers in this country. We have a cultural and national shorthand that that we all know. We all know when someone says a phrase, we all can pretty much relate to it. The things I'm reading now, the things you're writing now, you're bringing this whole new vocabulary, this whole new set of shorthand in. There's so much I don't know. And my group finally realized there's so much we don't know when we're reading a story and looking something up, and reading a story and looking something up. To the point where our next book is going to be a collection of African folk tales and myths. So that's what we're starting this year. So thank you. But I do have a quick question. We're in the world of sequels and series, and you go to the library bookstore, you see something, you almost don't want to pick the first one up because you know there's 8 other ones behind it. How do you do that? I mean, I write short stuff. How do you go into something thinking this is going to be 4 books, this is going to be 3 books? Do you do that, or do you just write and go, I can't tell all this in one book? So how do you do that?
I'm like crying because I'm just like, oh God.
Thank you.
I mean, I like standalones. I really enjoy standalones, and I've written a lot of them. And the series that I have, like the Binti trilogy, no, I did not know that was going to be a trilogy. When I first wrote it, it was I knew there was more story. I knew I was still interested in the character of Binti, but nope, didn't know. And I'm very glad that I've had an understanding publisher, because I wrote Binti. And man, I did not know that it would get the response that it got. I did not expect that at all, because it was a very personal story, very personal, once again. And so I wrote Binti. It was a novella, and when I finished it, I didn't even know what it was. I finished it, and I was like, okay, this isn't a novel. So I had to Google the word count. And then I saw, oh, it's a novella, okay. And then I'm like, what do you do with a novella? How do you sell? I had to figure all of that out. So I didn't even know, and I tend to, when I sit down to write, I don't know the length. I don't even know, like I'll start something, I won't know if it's a short story or a novel or whatever, and I just write it until it's done. And so like Binti turned out to be a novella, and then literally exactly a year later, I wrote another one, and I remember sending it to my publisher with no warning. I just sent him like, here, I did this. And they're like, oh, okay, good. And so then they published that. And then exactly a year later, the 3rd one came. And I did not know it was gonna come, but it did. And that happened too. So like, I didn't know that was a trilogy. Now with She Who Knows, I wrote the first one, and I knew, like, when I finished it, like, I thought I was writing a novel, and when I finished it, it suddenly just stopped. It, like, ended. And I'm like, this is the end. And I looked at the length, I'm like, oh, I've done it again, oh, God. And then but this time I knew more of the story. And I knew that, so She Who Knows is about Najiba when she's in her teens. And then the next part of the story was when she was in her 40s. So that's how I knew. I'm like, oh man, this is a completely different book. So in that case, it was like, I knew it was going to be a novella series. I just knew it. And only because of what happened with Binti. Like, I kind of knew how novellas felt in my head versus novels. I knew that. But I like standalones. And one last thing, with Death of the Author, this one, it's like I finished the book and I love it and everything. And then I saw like some early reviews and they're already talking about a sequel. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, just,
Can I breathe? Like,
you know, exactly. Like, talking about it, and I haven't even thought about it. I'm like, I didn't even think this would have a sequel. That didn't cross. I mean, I could see, and then I looked at what they were saying, and I was like, oh no. Oh, like it. But it wasn't that. It was just like I could see what they meant. Like I'm like, I didn't set it up like that, but I could see what you mean. So yeah, I mean, but I'm not a sequel person. I do know people who've written, like they sell the first book, they sell a whole series, like a 7-book series when they've only written the first one. I couldn't do that. That is not me. I don't sell things until I like to write it before I sell it. But yeah, what do you think?
I need to get on that because I've definitely as a kid I loved long series. I loved like when stuff had 7 books, 8 books. As a writer now, I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
no, can we?
gotta-
I think for me it's just unfortunately like I like writing big chunky books, and so they're like, we're gonna have to split this up, and I'm like, oh, okay, but it's all really just one book. Like, and if they let
So
me,
that's the series? It's the whole book, and then they make it into a series? They like chop it up?
well, kind, because like to use the
That makes
Wraiths
more
series as an example, yeah, because like I see it as like. Honestly, structurally, I think of it more of like as a play. You know how a play has Act 1, Act 2? And so it's a duology. So it's essentially like the Act 1, Act
Yeah.
2 of a single story. So it was written as a series, but then it's like, of course, when you're structuring a play, it's very different than structuring a series. So in my head, I'm seeing it like, okay, these are 2 parts of one big story. But then the editor is like, okay, but each story actually needs to have its own arc and like rising. And I'm like, oh no. All that to say, it's definitely. I'm still learning this myself, so I feel like I can't give a good answer here, but I definitely think with a sequel, I don't know. I actually don't know. It's hard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's hard.
Hello. This feels surreal to be here. I'm from Kigali, East Africa, and I've been reading your books. We had a community library back home, and it feels like seeing your spirit face as a lamb person. So I'm really happy to be here. I've always been curious, as a person in academia, you have a way you use words. You're not afraid to make your characters stubborn. They use curse words. For instance, in Skabu, you talk about a lawyer with nonyash. Like, so, and when I got here, I came here to do law school, and I realized that here there's another form of civility. You have to say please. You don't have to comment about someone's body. But back home, when you gain weight, you're like, you look chubby. Like, you're not scared to say her.
They will let you know.
So, how do you get away with that level of stubbornness in your writing?
I mean, how do I get away? I mean, like, I just do. You know, you just do, and I did have a character who did say that to one of my characters. It was a Kabu Kabu. It was a short story where the guy, the cab driver looks at this. She's a lawyer, and he said that she has no nyash. It was, you know, and you're right, you know, just to be able to say those things. But I mean, when it comes to curse words, I'm liberal with it. If my character curses, then they're gonna curse. I will say that in Like Thunder, I had a character, the main character, who his father cursed a lot, and so therefore he cursed a lot. And my publisher did have me remove a few of the words, and I didn't agree with that. You know, because I think it's true to his character. Of course, he's gonna say, I can't say the word. You know, I probably shouldn't. But he's gonna say those words a lot because, you know, he kind of picked it up from his father. So I don't know. I think that that if the character speaks like, if it's true to the story, then it's fine. You know, then you should be open to having your character say whatever they need to say. I mean, I'm pro curse words, I guess.
100%. And plus, like, I don't know, this might be your experience. Like, once I started going around asking people about witches and all that stuff, and everyone assumed I was trying to curse them, which I wasn't. And so at some point, you're just like, you just embrace it. They're like, they're gonna be upset either way, so you may as well get something out of it. Like,
Yeah, good point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for your questions, and thank you guys so much for joining me and our library in conversation. I'm going to turn it over to our book signing. So if you guys want to stop by the table, please do. Thank you to One More Page, who are selling books out in the lobby as well. And join us in 2 weeks for our next Arlington Reads. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so book signing's going to start right here. We're going to go along the stage, and we're going to line up down the middle.